contradicted federal pandemic priorities. The question at hand today is what universities should have done in face of the government suppression policy discussion. Places like Stanford, Harvard, Oxford have as a central part of their mission the support of exploration of ideas that are crucial to public life, including especially controversial ideas. The purpose of academic freedom is not actually for professors, it's for the public. The conceit is that the public well-being is promoted if there's at least one place in society where difficult conversations are embraced, because some of those controversial ideas might very well turn out to be true, ultimately transforming society for the better. Academic freedom matters most in the edge cases when a faculty member or student is pursuing an idea that others in the university find inconvenient or objectionable. If universities cannot protect academic freedom in these edge cases, they can't protect academic freedom at all. And when the government suppresses free exchange of ideas, as they did during this pandemic, it should be the mission of universities to push back and provide an open forum for anyways. Universities are not and should not be cat's paws of the government. Instead, universities, which receive billions of dollars in support from the NIH and other federal government sources, this is my theory, became the least free place in the world for speech. Many professors who signed the GBD written to me to tell me about harassment and abuse they faced from university administrators and colleagues for signing. Some were fired for signing the GBD. Stanford was no exception. Every prominent professor at Stanford who voiced opposition to lockdowns or just doubts about COVID-era dogma have told me stories of personal recriminations, including spurious and costly investigations by the university, and the tacit support by administration for a hostile work environment. Junior professors have told me in confidence that they kept silent, though they agreed with me on COVID policy for fear of reprisal. The tone was set when the faculty senate voted to condemn Dr. Scott Atlas, who you just heard talk about his ideas on COVID, for the advice he was giving President Trump. Basically, what he was telling the president was better focused protection of the elderly and opening schools. Both absolutely 100% correct. At one point in 2021, the chair of epidemiology at Stanford circulated a secret petition signed by 100 of my colleagues seeking to have the president of the university to silence me because I'd publicly come out against masking toddlers. The problem was, like, I did it at a policy round table held by Governor DeSantis of Florida. There was a poster campaign on kiosks around campus that put pictures of me everywhere, accusing me of killing people in Florida. I was physically afraid to walk on campus and complained about that when the poster campaign happened, because the posters are near my favorite coffee shop on campus, where it was well known to be. You guys, if you ever come to Stanford, can find me there. But the university administration did nothing to address the hostile work environment that it promoted. I never received an invitation to the medical school to present at Grand Rounds, which is a high-profile presentation by faculty members on a topic of importance to the entire medical school. Instead, Grand Rounds and other seminars and webinars at Stanford univocally promoted positions, which is now obvious were devastatingly wrong, pro-lockdown, zero-COVID positions, but which no one on campus was allowed to debate or challenge officially. Around the world in 2020 and 2021, the GBD was a central topic of policy discussion, but not officially at Stanford. More than a year later, in early 2022, I asked the dean of the medical school why I and other prominent lockdown skeptic members of the Stanford faculty never received an invitation to present. He told me that the experience of caring for COVID patients in March of 2020 had scared some Stanford clinical faculty. And in 2022, mind you, he told me this, that it's still too early for a dispassionate academic discussion of COVID policy. Had I been given the opportunity, I would have told my colleagues that focused protection ideas contained in the GBD would have prevented many of those hospitalizations. Stanford failed to create a work environment where these discussions could happen during the pandemic. Inviting you to imagine the counterfactual, that Stanford actually had embraced its motto of letting the winds of freedom blow. What I submit to you is that we would have won that policy discussion, and the world might have avoided a lot of suffering.
Thank you. So my big question was, why do you think we failed, right? If I can go back to why I think I, as a medievalist, was able to see it all, right? We both, Scott was talking about how there's concern about whether we listen to experts anymore, and you're, Jay, talking about how even the universities aren't listening to its own experts. And I'd say I should have been the first expert consulted, actually, not because I'm, related to doctors and things like that, but haven't you heard how the Middle Ages, in fact, gives us the primary example of coercive mind control? Every single time we say that we're not going to do this again, you point to the Middle Ages and say, well, it was an Inquisition, right? We don't want that again. And I say, exactly how are we supposed to know when that sort of social phenomenon is coming on, sort of washing over us, right? And I'm sure all of us in the room have heard, for example, Matthias Desmet's arguments about how to do mass formation and the sort of ideas together. But it was interesting for me, and I do think as a historian, this was very, very significant that one, as a historian, I am trained to take the narrative that everybody is living by and say, whether or not the Catholic Church actually was the greatest institution of coercive mind control that we've ever had to deal with, or not, right? Likewise, that I teach in our core sequence in the history of European civilization, we practice understanding what happened in the French Revolution, how you end up going from the ideals of the summer of 1789 to the terror of 1794. It's like, how do we study all of these things and completely miss the signs yet again? It was interesting to me that in spring 2020, I was teaching my course on Tolkien, and I was saying this story is, in fact, one of our greatest protections against this sort of fear spell that passed over